This investigation is sponsored by Expedition Agartha. Hey fellow seekers, I'm Mr. Mythos and we're back with another episode of Inner Earth Conspiracy Theories. The year was 1990, the country Bulgaria, the village Tsarichina. At the end of the Cold War, when our story takes place, this village was populated by only a few dozen people. Despite the immense and radical changes the post-Soviet country was facing at this time, life in Tsarichina was mostly unaffected, with its villagers simply concerned with keeping their homes warm and their families fed. Soon, however, and without warning, this tranquil way of life would come to an end. On December 6, 1990, a large military convoy descended over Tsarichina with dozens of armored tanks and industrial trucks rumbling into the village. Men in military uniforms spilled out into the streets, fenced off a wide area, and unloaded heavy machinery from the vehicles. And they revealed nothing to the villagers beyond what could be seen from a distance. The military dug a hole in Tsarichina, 160 meters long, 70 meters deep. The military occupied Tsarichina and dug this hole in complete secrecy for almost 2 years, until the operation suddenly ended on November 19th, 1992. On immediate orders of the Bulgarian Ministry of Defense, the hole was filled to the top with concrete, and the members of the project were forced to hand over all documentation, which to this day remains classified. So what really happened in this village? Well, those involved in the project would later claim that they had been searching for something very strange and possibly very dangerous. An inner earth entity that had been dormant for millions of years, waiting to be dug up and awakened. And they may have found it. But before we dive into this inner earth conspiracy, if you're a fan of inner earth lore, you're probably very familiar with Agartha, the name of the inner earth realm, and you've probably seen my video on it. But did you know that almost exactly a year ago, I was contacted by one of my channel patrons who happened to be working on a video game called Expedition Agartha, a multiplayer PvP survival adventure game that actually lets you explore inner earth with a team of friends and discover the lore and loot of this subterranean world. And guess who helped contribute a few ideas? Mr. Mythos. Expedition Agartha's surface world is based on the legends of Mu and Lemuria, and the land below from the lore of Shambhala. And all throughout you'll discover a story drenched in occult conspiracy theory, traverse ancient ruins inspired by Mayan and Hindu mythology, and test your courage in an expedition as exciting and dangerous as the ancients warned. Your goal is to uncover treasure to complete quests and extract to safety before your time is up. All of this is why I'm so excited that finally, Expedition Agartha released in early access on Steam, and I've been spending most of my free time setting out on expeditions with friends, battling other players, and looting fragments of the Chintamani stone. And seeing as how I love the game and the developer has been such an incredible support to the channel, I'm asking all my fans who are gamers to support his work too and go explore Inner Earth yourself. Grab your copy at expeditionagartha.mrmythos.com or search Expedition Agartha on Steam, and don't forget to invite a friend or two. Thanks again to Expedition Agartha. Let's dive right into one of the strangest Inner Earth conspiracies I've ever come across, the Hole of Tsarichina. In 1990, Bulgaria was finally free from the shackles of communism. They'd left the USSR, and promises of freedom and democracy rang through the country. It was an exciting time to be alive, but despite so much optimism, Bulgaria was actually in the throes of a dire financial situation. Digging the Tsarichina hole cost 16 million lev, the equivalent of 8.5 million US dollars in 1990, and almost $20 million today. The reasons why the Bulgarian government would literally spend millions digging a giant hole in the middle of nowhere have led to some strange theories, which is not surprising. It was a remarkably expensive undertaking for a country with so little money at the time, and still remains one of the most, if not the most expensive archaeological dig in Bulgarian history. One of the more down-to-earth speculations was that this digging operation was a cover-up to exchange money between hands and filter it through the military. And while this theory aligns with the fact that corruption was a serious issue, it holds less weight when you consider just how many first-hand accounts of those involved claim something completely different. Today, Tsarichina is nicknamed the Area 51 of Bulgaria, and that's for pretty darn good reason. In just 2 years, this tiny, unassuming village would become the subject of countless military secrets, psychic phenomena, UFO sightings, and extraterrestrial contact. For such a deep rabbit hole, there's a bit of context we need to understand how we know this operation was real, why the Bulgarian military was involved, and what exactly landed them in Tsarichina out of all places. To begin, I want to make it very clear that there's a mountain of reliable evidence that proves this 2-year operation actually occurred. Despite it being a secret operation, news of the military's occupation in Tsarichina achieved a pretty high level of publicity, with around 50 speculative articles published in the Sofia Press, beginning when the military first arrived and lasting through the lifetime of the excavation. In fact, there is even mention of it in a record released by the American CIA. But just as the details were top secret back then, all official documentation on the operation remains strictly classified to this day, so it's difficult to say with certainty what exactly occurred there, besides the fact that they dug a deep hole. That being said, a number of the operation's key players, including military officials and others in leadership roles, chose to band together and break their silence, beginning with a public conference held in the capital city of Bulgaria, Sofia, just 2 years after the events, which led to a tidal wave of disclosure at the risk of their lives and careers. While their accounts may sound like science fiction, these individuals tell a surprisingly cohesive narrative, and not only do their details match up, but they seem to fill in each other's missing gaps with little contradiction. And Bulgarians who lived in or around Tsarichina at this time also back up the truth of their claims, as far as what they observed or experienced personally. I'm not saying anything you're going to hear in this video is necessarily true, but for one of the most insane stories I've ever covered on my channel, it ranks remarkably high in the realm of historical possibility. At the very least, something very strange happened beneath the ground of this remote village. But the story of the Tsarichina hole actually begins in the sky above. In 1989, there were 2 major reports of unidentified flying objects in Bulgaria. The first was in the early morning of December 17, 1989. Several independent witnesses reported seeing a large object landing near the Military Medical Academy in Vanga, only 20 miles from Tsarichina. They also reported that after the landing, what looked like 3 humanoid figures emerged from the craft. The second account also took place in Vanga, just 1 day after, on December 18, 1989. Around 7 p.m., the military aircraft captain Krasimir Vetskov videotaped an unidentified flying object over the Dragoman and Leoline Mountains. This recording was 17 minutes long, but unfortunately all copies of it seem to have been lost to time. Vetskov stated in his official report, quote, "If I had not seen it myself, I would not believe it." End quote. These back-to-back UFO sightings in Vanga were enough to spark intrigue across the country, and the Bulgarian government took notice. Less than 1 year later, on November 21, 1990, the Bulgarian Ministry of Defense established a research wing dedicated to investigating UFO and paranormal phenomena, the name of which loosely translates to the Association of Phenomena. While the Association of Phenomena was led by scientists and funded by pragmatic government authorities, they took a rather unconventional approach to their work. The association went out of their way to employ several Bulgarian psychics they believed to be gifted in order to help them better understand the extraterrestrial phenomenon. While it may seem ridiculous that a government would work with, let alone employ full-time psychics for serious work, it's a historical fact that almost every major world power has done the same. From Russia to China, Japan, Germany, the US, and more. Some of you may know I dedicated 2 entire videos to the psychic military unit run by the US Army and the CIA, known as Project Stargate. And if you're skeptical of psychic powers, those videos should contain enough direct and statistical evidence to change your mind. After all, there's a reason why the unit was funded and approved by Congress for over 20 years. I'll leave a link in the description if you're interested, but for the time being, it's worth keeping an open mind. A few days after the Association of Phenomena was formed, an elevator technician named Dmitry Kekamenov contacted them. Kekamenov claimed to be a psychic and stated that for some time now, an inner voice kept pulling him to a certain spot in the remote foothills of the Balkan Mountains, and demanded all of his attention to this one place, and that place was the village of Tsarichina. This inner voice was accompanied by vivid repeating dreams of famous 19th century Bulgarian revolutionaries such as Rakovsky, Levski, and Vazov visiting him. According to Kekamenov, the revolutionary Georgy Rakovsky put his hand on his shoulder and said to him, quote, "Dmitry Bulgarian, lead the Bulgari," end quote. But it gets even weirder. In addition to these dreams, Kekamenov was contacted by what he described as a cosmic intelligence, who revealed to him that he was the descendant of Tsar Samuil, the emperor of the First Bulgarian Empire, and as his descendant, Kekamenov would be heir to something amazing. There had long been a folk belief in Tsarichina and the nearby villages that an incredible treasure lay hidden in their land, specifically the lost buried hoard of Tsar Samuil, who reigned over the area 1,000 years before. If you watched my recent video, Treasure Hunting with Demons, you'll know that pretty much all of Europe has a long and rich history of both treasure burying and treasure hunting, and Bulgaria is no exception. While treasure hunting with the aid of demons and magic was definitely no longer in style by the 20th century, that's not to say one couldn't quest for buried treasure alongside a cosmic intelligence. But generally and secularly speaking, this get-rich-quick activity was so popular and successful in Bulgaria that treasure hunting was made illegal, except, of course, by the government itself. Despite being haunted by disembodied voices and dead revolutionaries, Kekamenov was stable enough to not only know this law, but abide by it. He understood that he wouldn't be able to excavate his treasure himself without risking arrest, so to access it, he would need help from the government. He was also fully aware that they'd be interested because his country was so in debt that even a share of this treasure trove would significantly bolster the economy. As a proud Bulgarian, Kekamenov wanted nothing more than to help his people. The Association of Phenomena felt that he was of stable mind and took his claims seriously. A week later, on December 3rd, 1990, the association notified the Bulgarian Ministry of Defense, and they too assessed and interviewed Kekamenov and were equally convinced. So that very evening, a seance was set up with Kekamenov, several psychics from the Association of Phenomena, and representatives of the Ministry of Defense. The seance lasted several hours, and by the end of it, the psychics who attended had made contact with the same celestial intelligence who'd spoken to Kekamenov, and they confirmed that something extremely precious was buried beneath the ground in Tsarichina. However, it was not the treasure of Tsar Samuil. It wasn't even treasure in the traditional sense. Far more precious than any heirloom or artifact was something that would change all that we know of the history of mankind and of the world. What lay hidden under Tsarichina was the first human. The psychics made it clear that this being was not the biblical Adam, but rather a stellar atom, as they called it, a being of extraterrestrial origin with DNA similar to our own, from which the human race was born. The idea that humans may have biological ties to extraterrestrials is not exactly new. Depending on how you interpret certain ancient mythologies and religious scriptures, humans may have come to this conclusion thousands of years ago. In the Bible's book of Genesis, for example, it said that, quote, God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. End quote. The Bible's book of Ezekiel then describes God as descending from the sky in a flaming craft made of a material described as, quote, like glowing metal, sparkling like crystal, end quote. And the book of Exodus describes the way Israel's high priests communicated with God, which required 2 stones made of onyx, a piezoelectric material. If any of that sounds high-tech to you, you can see why some believe the Bible is a poetic interpretation of ancient aliens and our origin from them. But how could I not mention the most popular theory, and one that many of us might be familiar with? And for those who aren't, I'll give my 1-minute summary. To most historians and scholars, the Anunnaki are the gods of ancient Mesopotamia, first written of around 2100 BC. Like the God of the Hebrew Bible, the Anunnaki were described as superpowered deities with a history of coming down from the heavens to visit Earth. And the Sumerian creation myth tells that the Anunnaki created humans in their own image, although their reason was quite practical. Mankind was to perform labor for them as slaves. The sacred Enuma Elish scripture reads, quote, when the gods bore the work and suffered the toil of the gods was great, the work was heavy, the distress was much. I have removed your heavy work, I have imposed your toil on man, end quote. All scholars agree on these interpretations, as well as the fact that the major members of the Anunnaki pantheon are associated with specific celestial bodies. But all of this does raise a legitimate question. Is it possible that these beings may have actually been a race of extraterrestrials who genetically engineered humans using their own DNA? And returning to the Tsarichina operation, keep in mind that a so-called celestial intelligence revealed this so-called first human to the psychics, a revelation explicitly described as extraterrestrial in origin. So could it be that beneath Tsarichina was the original clone of the Anunnaki? Well, the Ministry of Defense and the Association of Phenomena were wholly unaware of Anunnaki mythology, but they did find the results of the seance incredibly convincing. Because just 3 days later, they secured a swath of funding, mobilized a task force, and invaded the village with shovels in hand. And here we meet the main character of our story, a woman named Elisaveta Loginova. As part of the task force sent to Tsarichina, Loginova was a key psychic and would ultimately end up directing every move of the excavation, after becoming the favorite contact of the cosmic intelligence. All involved seemed to agree that she was truly gifted in this. But despite her vital role in the project, she was one of the last major participants to disclose her own account, which she did in her 2018 book titled Tsarichina, Fateful Contact. And thankfully, she spared very little detail. And better yet, other former participants have vouched for it as both accurate and reliable to the events. The first chapter of Loginova's book describes how she first discovered her psychic powers, and specifically the talent she'd go on to master, the ability to channel messages from other psychic entities through automatic writing. If you're not familiar, automatic writing is when words, sentences, and entire texts are written without voluntarily or even consciously doing so, and usually occurs while the writer is in a trance. While some interpret the results of this phenomenon as a product of the unconscious mind, others are convinced that what ends up on the page was channeled directly from a foreign entity, entirely independent of the rider. That was the case for Elisaveta Loganova, who was well into her adulthood when she first discovered this ability. She recalls sitting on her patio with her two sons, aged 2 and 8, and thinking up a creative activity for the kids to pass the time. The idea she eventually landed on, though, was a bit out of this world. Quote, "To this day, I don't know why I suggested they call aliens to tell them stories. I explained to them that the beings from other worlds were certainly very kind, loved children, and would respond to their request." End quote. It's not clear whether Loganova understood what automatic writing was at this point, but she handed each of her boys a paper and pencil and suggested they use their mind to contact the aliens and write down whatever they heard back. The kids began excitedly, but after a few minutes, they failed to write much of anything. They told her the aliens weren't replying. Loganova couldn't stand to disappoint her kids, so she said to them, quote, "Don't give up. They will start telling us things. Give me the pencil." End quote. As soon as she grabbed the pencil, however, an immense energy surged through her hand and word after word was scrawled out onto the page in rapid succession. She describes it as if she lost complete control and all sense of time until the message was complete, and it was frightening for her. But her boys clapped their hands and laughed, not understanding that their mom had underwent a powerful psychic possession and would never be the same again. Unfortunately, she doesn't elaborate on the specific content of the message, but here's a scan of it from her book, so if you can read Bulgarian, please let me know what it says in the comments. After this event, Loganova began to experience a terrible pain in her abdomen, accompanied by more messages over the weeks and months that followed. While doctors failed to find any medical cause for the pain, the psychic messages revealed its origin. Apparently, that event had established a connection between Loganova and her extraterrestrial contacts, and she was in the process of absorbing their energy to complete the psychic link. They reassured her that after this energy transfer, the pain would disappear, and according to Loganova, it did, after 2 long painful months. At this point, her extraterrestrial contacts made their identity known. Quote, "They introduced themselves to me by the name of Roro." End quote. Though Loganova never says it, it seems that the Roro were the same celestial intelligence who originally sent the revelations of Tsarichina to Dmitry Kekamenov. But while Kekamenov misinterpreted their message, Loganova proved to be a much more accurate receiver. Loganova describes the sensation of them speaking to her. Quote, "I feel a strong vibration in my whole body. I get hot and I start talking or writing. As long as the contact is in progress, I cannot separate myself from this energy. I sense the presence of them around me. Deep in my brain, I can hear. The message is often accompanied by moving pictures, as if I'm traveling in some parallel world that is both here and far, far away. After finishing, I feel tired, hungry, and thirsty." End quote. As we might expect, the continual cosmic contact took a serious toll on Loganova's life. With the help of her husband, she sought out those who might shed some light on what she was going through, and eventually this landed her in contact with the Association of Phenomena. In October of 1990, she joined their cause, and just 2 months later in December, Loganova would be recruited for the excavation at Tsarichina. Little did anyone know how important Elisaveta Loganova would become to the operation, except for, perhaps, the Roro. Around the same time Loganova was assigned to Tsarichina, another key psychic would join their team. Her name was Marina Neplatonova, a 27-year-old woman. Her father, Professor Deocho Neplatonov, was assigned as chief of the association's scientific department, and he insisted that Marina participate in the excavation at Tsarichina. He vouched that she was a truly gifted contactee of extraterrestrials, and that, unlike Loganova, Marina had honed her psychic abilities since childhood. The man in charge of this whole operation, General Radnu Minchev, was convinced that the more gifted psychics who participated, the faster they'd finish. So, after sending one of his men to confirm Marina's abilities, she was officially contracted, and just in time. Having missed the preliminary meetings, Marina would be part of the task force sent to Tsarichina on December 6th. As the convoy of psychics, soldiers, scientists, and machinery rolled in, Loganova recalls that she and her fellow psychics had only been given this simple brief, quote, "You set out to find the treasure of King Samuil. Its value is great and it can help the prosperity and good name of Bulgaria. But much more important is to find the remains of the first man who lived on Earth. He was a hermaphrodite, and this discovery will overturn the history of the world." End quote. Upon their arrival in Tsarichina, Loganova was informed by the head of the operation, General Minchev, that Marina Neplatonova received extraterrestrial instruction on the exact location to start the dig. And that was a problem, because Loganova had also received instruction from her contacts in the Roro star system, and their designated dig location was 100 meters to the right of Marina's. General Minchev figured this was a simple miscommunication, so he decided to introduce the two psychics to one another. As Marina joined last minute, this was their first meeting, and it wasn't so great. Loganova's first impression of her might sound rather mean, but I'll explain after. Quote, "I saw Marina for the first time, and I was scared. She reminded me of a biorobot from sci-fi movies. She looked strange, to say the least, both human and not quite. Her movements were jerky and truncated. She answered with a word or two, and it was impossible just to talk to her. Her face was expressionless, her eyes fixed on one point. The sight of her awakened one of my greatest fears, that I would lose my normal human qualities alongside my contacts with the extraterrestrials." End quote. This deep fear is something Loganova mentions throughout her book, that extended contact with the Roro and their energy would cause her to gradually lose her human qualities, and it seems that's what she assumed happened to Marina, who'd been a contactee for almost all the years of her life. As Marina refused to communicate, Loganova and General Minchev discussed the next steps privately, and decided that the next day's excavation would begin according to Loganova's instructions. But this decision didn't settle well with Marina's father, Professor Deocho Neplatonov. According to Loganova, Professor Neplatonov became enraged, spat curses at her, and demanded that General Minchev let Marina lead the dig. The general was obviously not impressed by this behavior, and gave Neplatonov an ultimatum. Either he accepts the decision, or he and his daughter would be kicked out of the operation. Loganova attempted to calm down the situation by reminding Neplatonov that it wasn't a competition, and that, as a team with the same goal, they needed to work together. But Loganova's inspiring pep talk was interrupted by Marina, who became frenzied and screamed, quote, "They say no! They declare war!" End quote. According to Loganova, Marina never elaborated on who was declaring war against whom, and what this war was about, but simply repeated these words over and over. Over the years, this lack of context has led to some pretty far-out theories, and based on the fact that Marina's alien contacts were never given a name, some people theorize they may have not actually been the Roro, but another extraterrestrial civilization altogether. And if the excavation of the first human was of importance to both, perhaps it would result in war. At the end of the day, though, no one really knows, because Professor Neplatonov grabbed his daughter's arm and they left. And while this was the end of their involvement at Tsarichina, the end of their story would be far more tragic. Several months after leaving the project, Marina ended up taking her own life by jumping from the 10th floor window of her apartment building. While some conspiracy theorists suggest that her alien contacts forced her to do this as punishment for her failure, there's no evidence to back this up. To me, honestly, it seems she may have been suffering from schizophrenia or some other mental illness, which might explain her strange demeanor and frenzied behavior. No matter what the truth was, though, at this point in time, Marina and her father had exited the excavation, and Loganova and her contacts from the Roro star system were free to run the operation as they saw fit. Loganova was officially appointed head of the psychic team, so the military packed up their tools, moved 100 meters to the right, and restarted the dig. After the initial hole had been dug, strange happenings began to occur in and over Tsarichina. These events made Loganova's claims of the Roro far more real to all those involved because, beyond sending distant messages, it seemed that the Roro began to involve themselves directly in the operation. And this brings us to the first major phenomena witnessed by the project's participants. Roughly translated, Operation Sunbeam was the official codename given to the Tsarichina excavation, and unlike most codenames, Operation Sunbeam apparently had a very literal significance, because according to all those involved, the entire dig would become riddled with magnificent light-related phenomena. For example, Loganova mentions, quote, "Fireballs often appeared above the hole, mostly at night, but also during the day, always in threes and in a certain configuration. On a warm, calm day, we sat down with the soldiers on the ground. Suddenly, we saw a huge ball of fire appear from the field, 10 meters above the ground." End quote. However, these fireballs were far from the only light phenomena witnessed. The name Operation Sunbeam accurately describes the other, far more important event that would occur again and again throughout the excavation effort. This is best explained by the team's head science officer, Colonel Svetko Kanev, in his book The Tsarichina Experience. According to Colonel Kanev, the project psychics were informed by their extraterrestrial contacts that some sort of celestial event would occur on certain days between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. They'd specify the exact date and time shortly before it happened, and the celestial event itself would show the team where to direct the tunnel next. Quote, "The clouds in the direction of the solstice dispersed, and the winter sun showered us with dazzling light. It was at this moment that those in the excavation should have followed the movement of the beam." End quote. As wild as it sounds, Kanev's description of the sunbeam phenomenon matches with Loganova's own account. In her own words, quote, "A powerful pillar of light with the colors of the rainbow emerged from the opening of the site and rose vertically upwards." End quote. Though this sunbeam blazed the path for the dig a number of times, the phenomena was far from frequent, let alone predictable. So to patch in the lengthy gaps, they'd still mainly rely on the instructions psychically received by Loganova, and thus, for a while, making progress and digging ever deeper was simple enough. However, as they approached 70 meters in length, the earth became unusually hard and difficult to excavate. What was at first dirt turned to a thick clay, and that clay eventually led to some unknown rock, seemingly harder than concrete. According to Kanev, quote, "It was a monolithic mass that did not lend itself to processing. I dispute the claims of scientists that it was an ordinary natural phenomenon. No matter how rich the Earth's natural endowment is, and no matter how strong nature is, it could not create this thing." End quote. This painfully hard ground may have dramatically slowed their progress, but work continued. Unfortunately, they soon faced a new problem. Their machinery and tools began to falter, halt, and eventually stop working completely because they weren't made to deal with such unusually dense rock, and efforts to tunnel through it seemed to just get more difficult the further they went. According to Loganova, they reached a point where the Ministry of Defense called in explosive specialists to blast away the rock, but even this proved next to useless. Quote, "When it finally became clear that the blasters were powerless against the rock in the tunnel, our alien guides made it clear that they would help through me. They will make the daily blasting patterns, determine how much explosive is needed, and how deep the holes should be for it. We were told that this would neutralize the energetic solder of the stonework and the tunnel would be easily cleared." End quote. And apparently this worked for a while, at least until they had completely spent both their explosive and machinery budget. Finally, the dig team was forced to use hand tools to remove loose soil and rubble in buckets. Obviously, this was time-consuming work, and we can begin to see why this hole took almost 2 full years to dig to the end. Originally, the Roro told Loganova that the dig would take only 3 days, but by this point, digging with hand tools and buckets, it had been several months. To make matters worse, this hole they were digging was not just a straight hole into the ground. Guided by both the sunbeam as well as messages received by Loganova, the Tsarichina hole ended up being a spiral-like tunnel. It actually took everyone quite a while to realize they'd been following a pattern. They would dig in one direction, turn some 90 degrees, dig, turn again, dig, turn, and so on. Colonel Konev states that the dig team feared for their lives that a cave-in could happen at any moment due to the spiraling shape of the tunnel, but still they pressed on. You're probably wondering how these people kept up their morale, and Loganova explains, quote, "We believed that, guided by the cosmic masters, the Roro, we would get to the remains of the first Earthling. We believed that this discovery would rewrite history and that Bulgaria would finally enter the world stage with good news. But the hard work in the tunnel, often lasting 12 to 13 hours a day, the tremendous mental and physical strain, demanded that we receive daily proof of the reliability of the information from the Roro. And we were getting them. We always reached the next landmark or marker that the Roro had warned us about in advance. Day after day, however, the finish was postponed, and this plagued us. The thought that we would work for so long never crossed our minds." End quote. Over time, this lack of a clear finish line, compounded by these spiraling digging directions, eventually made many begin to doubt Loganova's psychic accuracy. This may have been what led the project leader, General Minchev, to seek the opinion of a famous Bulgarian psychic with a tried-and-true history, respected even to this day for her staggering accuracy. This was the blind herbal healer and seer, known as Baba Vanga. Baba Vanga, whose real name was Vangelia Dimitrova, was born on January 31st, 1911. Living most of her life in the Rupite area of the Kozu Mountains of Bulgaria, she rose to fame due to the accuracy of the many predictions she made over the course of her life, and became known by the affectionate nickname Baba Vanga, which means Grandmother Vanga in Bulgarian. At just 12 years old, she became lost during a storm and was sucked up by a tornado that threw the young girl violently through the air and into a nearby field. Witnesses remember finding her with her eyes covered in sand and unable to open due to the horrible pain. Her family had very little money, so she could only have a partial operation to treat her injuries, and eventually this led to a gradual loss of vision. It was a terrible tragedy, but ultimately it was one that led Baba Vanga to develop her second sight. Some of Baba Vanga's predictions deemed to be accurate include her foretelling of the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and the presidency of Barack Obama. She was even arrested and sent to a Bulgarian prison after foretelling the death of the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, then released upon Stalin's death 6 months later, accurate to how she had foretold. And even to this day, it seems that more of her prophecies continue to be fulfilled, because even though Baba Vanga died in 1996, she left the world with a list of her predictions up until the year 5079. With an estimated 65 to 85% success rate, it's no surprise that many high-ranking Bulgarian politicians and government officials frequently consulted with her. But out of hundreds of these consultations, and even the tens of thousands of predictions made in her career, those involving Tsarichina ended up being some of the most specific, frightening, and downright bizarre of them all. When Baba Vanga was approached by the Tsarichina team to give her opinion on the situation, they likely hoped for a solution, a reason to be optimistic, but this is what the seer delivered instead. Quote, "The aliens told me that the research has to stop. Don't dig, it's not your time. There is the center of the Earth, at a depth of 2,000 kilometers. There's a big crystal that's dangerous and will stay there as long as the Earth exists. It controls its movement. Stop digging or the Earth will die. There will be hard days ahead for humans. There will be many new terrible diseases if you keep digging. In this hole there is hell, but it is not hell as you know it. There are people who live down there just like us, but their origin is different." End quote. Alright, that's actually just half of her prophecy, but I have to interject because what Baba Vanga foretold matches a reoccurring detail I've noticed again and again in my research, that the people of Inner Earth are both similar in many ways to humans, but inherently different. Continuing where we left off, quote, "There's also a space device. It was sent by an extraterrestrial civilization. There are astronauts down there. Thousands of years ago, when your country didn't even exist, a civilization from another planet sent a spaceship with 3 astronauts to Earth. They weren't human, they were robots. They were sent to investigate life on Earth, but they were damaged and the spacecraft crashed in Tsarichina. The more you dig, the more radiation you emit. Don't dig, it's not your time." End quote. While there's obviously a lot to talk about in this statement, I do have some striking Inner Earth connections to make first. If you've seen episode 2 in this series, you might remember Richard Shaver, who claimed to psychically hear the voices of the Darrow, Inner Earth beings he described as robotic and highly radioactive, 2 things specified by Baba Vanga. He also mentioned that the Darrow traveled in spaceships, used large high-tech devices underground, and that the Darrow existed on Earth before modern humans. And both Baba Vanga and Shaver compared the Inner Earth realm to hell. Both explicitly warned that these beings are a threat to the human race, and specifically, both described them as a source of deadly illness and disease, an ominous detail we'll actually revisit in just a minute. But considering that Richard Shaver's claims are some of the most outlandish we've encountered to date in this series, the sheer amount of parallels does make you think twice on what might be down there. All that said, Baba Vanga's prophecy had an enormous impact on the direction and future of Operation Sunbeam. She not only revealed the origin story of the ancient entombed entity the Bulgarian military had been digging for, but reconfirmed its existence, and most importantly, gave significant credibility to Loganova's psychic accuracy. So, despite her loud and clear, twice repeated warning to stop digging, Baba Vanga ended up reviving the team's determination to get to the end of the Tsarichina hole. So the dig continued, difficulty be damned, and further they tunneled. And according to those who were there, it wasn't long until this continued effort paid off. Once they finally made it through the inexplicably hard rock, they began to encounter what seemed to be the remains of artificial structures. First, some sort of arch was uncovered in the dirt, after which Loganova received an instruction from the Roro to turn the dig slightly to the left, and immediately they encountered another structure, what seemed to be the opening to an ancient tunnel, its entrance filled from top to bottom with rocks. When the diggers attempted to remove these rocks, some unknown substance seemed to glue them together. So if this was indeed an ancient passage, it was clear someone or something had deliberately blocked it off. Thankfully, the Roro allowed the team to circumvent this structure, and the digging continued. More obstacles would present themselves, though, in the months to come. Ones strange enough to indicate that the team was getting close to what they sought. One such obstacle, though, presented a great danger to all those involved. Colonel Konev described this object as a huge, flat, rectangular slab made of an unidentifiable material resembling stone. Immediately, the aliens of the rural star system sent a warning to Loganova that no one must touch the slab, which the Aurora referred to as a biological defense plate. They informed her that it was coated in a substance extremely dangerous to humans if touched, and that it must be demolished with extreme caution. Colonel Konev recounted, quote, "Its breaking had to be done with all means of protection and with continuous disinfection. According to the extraterrestrials, there were many types of dangerous bacteria embedded in the biological defense plate, which, if not neutralized in the destruction process, nothing good awaited the Earth, as they multiplied very quickly and would spread into the Earth's atmosphere in a short time." End quote. To everyone, this was pretty clear confirmation of Baba Vanga's prophecy, that new terrible diseases would be unleashed if they continued digging. But perhaps that dismal fate could be circumvented if they simply exercised the utmost caution. An overseer from the military, General Lubomir Denev, led the effort to dismantle the defensive plate, and thankfully he took the warning dead seriously. As recounted by his colleague Colonel Konev, quote, "In order to avoid accidents, General Denev forbade others from working on this task, except for the chemical officers. From their accounts, I know that the plate had several layers." End quote. A series of small holes were drilled through the defense plate, and then they used crowbars to break down the structure piece by piece. And this was just the first of 3 biological defense plates they would encounter as the dig continued. The biological defense plates are explained further by Loganova in her book. Quote, "The Roro called this structure the Stopper because of its role as an energy portal barrier. Laid down during the construction of the ancient tunnel, it protected it from uninvited guests, encroachment, and destruction. Access was determined by our cosmic guides through a kind of bioenergetic key. We were warned that as the work progressed, gas would appear. We were told that this gas was not dangerous to the task force participants, but any intruder would be paralyzed." End quote. By this point, it's clear just how deeply invested the Roro seemed to be in unearthing this ancient alien tomb, from sending daily instructions and dire warnings to Loganova to occasionally directing the dig themselves using a radiant beam of light. If the dig team was antsy to reach their treasure, perhaps the Roro were too, especially as the months continued to crawl by. One particular day, they sent Loganova an odd and urgent message, an event her book records in great detail. On May 12, 1991, around 8 p.m., Loganova was about to eat dinner with her colleagues when suddenly she felt an intense heat rush into her head, then spread across her body. Instinctively, she reached for a pen, opened her notebook, and wrote frantically, quote, "We are landing, and we will come to the site. We're landing in the ravine beyond the hill." End quote. As soon as she wrote that last word, the commandant of the site rushed in, out of breath and clearly flustered. He announced that a spaceship was landing, and panic set in across the room. Loganova and the rest of her team ran outside and saw it. Quote, behind a huge cloud, lights moved in a circle, illuminating the entire clear sky. The cloud reached the hill opposite, passed a little way behind it, and disappeared. All that was left were the blinding lights that kept moving. Again, my head and chest felt very heavy. We went back to the office and I started writing. End quote. The second message she received was a warning, a very specific order for all members of the operation to go indoors and shut the curtains. The Roro were preparing to enter the tunnel themselves. They explained that no human should be left outside because any contact with them would prove extremely dangerous. Loganova immediately spread the word and everyone was ordered to return to their tents, offices, or vehicles and shield the windows. Only the dogs remained outside. Shortly after taking shelter, Loganova and several others began to hear the dogs bark hysterically to the point of howling, and this continued for some time. The Roro continued to send Loganova updates regarding their distance from the site, and as they came closer, the dogs' barking slowly subsided. A final message was given, quote, we're on site, end quote, followed by a deathly silence. What was noticeably lacking was any information on why the Roro had made this visit at this particular time after so many months. Most importantly, what were they doing in the tunnel? For an hour, the team waited, and for an hour, the Roro made no communication. Then suddenly, the familiar heat and tension returned to Loganova's body. The message was clear. They'd done what they'd come for, and they were leaving the site. After 20 minutes, it would be safe to return outside. So they waited, and when they finally ventured out to see what had happened, the first thing that caught their eye were the dogs. While clearly still breathing, all 9 of them lay limp on the ground in a circular formation. As soon as the dogs sensed people approaching, they tried to stand up, twisting and turning on the ground until they eventually picked themselves up, swaying side to side as if heavily intoxicated. Loganova received another message from the Roro, quote, do you see the animals? The same could have happened to you. They'll be fine, but you might not survive. That's why we made you stay inside. Your energy and psyche are not ready for contact with us. End quote. After this, everyone immediately headed to the tunnel to investigate, and upon first glance, it was obvious that someone or something had been down there recently. Deep markings indicated that material was scooped away from the ceilings, walls, and floor. But other than this, nothing else had changed. The Roro must have been feeling particularly social that evening because not long after, they sent Loganova yet another message, an invitation for her to remote view. If you don't know, remote viewing is a psychic ability that purportedly allows the person to see across immense distances and through any physical barrier. And in Loganova's case, the Roro encouraged her to remote view the inside of their spaceship. So she excused herself from the group and settled in a quiet area beneath an oak tree. And meditating on the Roro's words, she suddenly found herself in a new environment, the inside of an alien craft, and in front of her stood the Roro. Quote, I didn't see faces because they were wearing spacesuits. They explained that they had to be dressed that way because of the foreign environment. I did, however, see humanoids that looked a lot like us, except for the fact that they were much taller. They also had long hair. I asked what the sun emblem on their chests meant, and was told that it was the symbol of their planet, the light by which they moved through space. End quote. The next morning, a search party was organized to find the landing site, but they failed to do so. Loganova asked the Roro several times for coordinates, and finally the Roro broke their silence, explaining that the health of any human exposed to them would rapidly deteriorate, and implied that the landing site was still irradiated from their presence, Then they proceeded to remind everyone that they were lucky to have witnessed such an event in the first place. And with that, all search efforts ceased. However, in the end, many wouldn't be satisfied, having simply experienced all that happened at Tsarichina, including Loganova herself, who eventually came to regret sending everyone inside that night. Quote, "Later, 1,000 times and for 1,000 reasons, we regretted that we did not have at least one photo as proof of this extremely close contact with representatives of cosmic intelligence." End quote. That was the one and only close encounter they'd experience, at least in terms of extraterrestrial. Intraterrestrial, however, was a story yet to come. A year passed as the digging team plowed ever deeper, toiling through blood, sweat, and tears. And with every ton of dirt excavated, the signs grew more apparent that they were closing in on their target, that had which been imprisoned in inner Earth since the dawn of mankind. That same month of the visitation, Loganova began to experience a new form of communication that, instead of channeling through pen and paper, appeared to her in her dreams and burned itself into her psyche. It wasn't a message she understood, though, not even in the slightest bit. All she saw was what appeared to be a message written in a wholly unknown and truly alien-looking script. When she awoke, the image remained in her mind so well that she was able to copy it letter for letter in a nearby notebook. And while she had no idea what they meant, these dreams kept coming, and by the end of the project, she'd filled over 1,000 pages with these messages. Loganova described this alien script as resembling hieroglyphs. Whatever they were, though, the language experts hired by the Bulgarian Ministry of Defense failed to identify them with any known language. To me, honestly, these letters almost remind me of demonic sigils. And while it's likely not the case, perhaps the solution was more mystic than linguistic. When the language experts failed, the team returned to the doorstep of the blind prophetess, Baba Vanga, despite the irony of her literally being unable to read because she was blind. Baba Vanga was undeterred, though, and accepted General Dinev, Colonel Kanev, and Loganova into her home. While they recorded audio of the conversation, all that remains today is a transcript. The following were Baba Vanga's words, quote, well, what else do you want to know? Don't take them out, I see them. Who will read the text? There is no one else. You will read the text you write. Only you, Loganova, you will read them. You will read them. End quote. But Baba Vanga was not yet done prophesying, because in that same conversation, she was struck by a sudden vision, which at first caused the old woman to giggle excitedly. Quote, ooh, I see. There she is, I see her. You will find a yellow monkey, neither man nor woman, in a capsule. If you open it, the air might revive it. What will you do when it starts talking? End quote. In 1994, 2 years after Operation Sunbeam was shut down and concrete filled the hole in Tsarichina, a conference took place in Sofia, the capital city of Bulgaria. Held by those who'd been involved in the excavation project and open to the public, the goal of this conference was to discuss, disclose, and piece together the puzzle of what truly happened at the Tsarichina dig site. Among the many former operation members invited to speak was the head science officer, Colonel Svetko Kanev. Today, a transcript of the conference is publicly available to read, including the statement given by Kanev, which regarded what they found after nearly 2 years of digging. It all began with one staggering swing of a drill, where no one expected to hit anything less than dense and difficult. But a hollow pocket was smashed in, and when the dig team shined their light into it, it clearly extended much further than they could see. A squadron of soldiers was assembled, led by Colonel Konev, and they descended into the hole and pulled themselves into the entrance of the structure. In his 1994 statement, Konev describes the almost psychedelic environment that they encountered. Quote, "Our flashlights exposed a colorful construction. Pink was a dominating color. Others were yellow, white, red, gray, black, orange, and brown. The eastern wall of the triangular opening had a black arrow about 1 meter long. This arrow pointed to the entrance to the object." End quote. Intrigued by what looked like a less than natural black arrow painted on the wall, Konev and his team followed its direction deeper into the technicolored cavern, and as he mentioned, at the end of the path, they discovered an object. This object would be named Object Number 1. Make no mistake, while we talk about a lot of lore on this channel, some things might actually be real. In 2008, a request for information was filed with the United States Central Intelligence Agency regarding Tsarichina, and the request was granted. We know this because it was included in a Freedom of Information Act log published in 2010. While it doesn't tell us exactly what CIA documentation was released, it does show that the CIA was aware of the project, and the description helps confirm some very vital information. Quote, "Operation from December 6, 1990 to November 19, 1992, carried out by the Bulgarian Ministry of Defense near the village of Tsarichina in the western region of Kostinbrod, Bulgaria, in excavating Object Number 1. End quote. Alright, enough beating around the bush. What exactly was this Object Number 1? Colonel Konev gave this description. Quote, "Object Number 1 is a reality, visible and tangible. This can be confirmed not only by the military crew, but by anyone who could touch it. On the northern wall there was a figure, resembling a human, but larger. It stood at a significantly greater height than earthly people. This figure was cherry red, or so it seemed by an electric light. It is a reality and must be studied further for our own good and the good of mankind." End quote. The time frame of the military's discovery of this Redstone Sentinel curiously coincided with another development. Apparently, after 2 long years, the Bulgarian government had grown concerned that too much money was being spent on Operation Sunbeam. All of a sudden, a team of federal investigators swooped in to assess whether this 160-meter long, 70-meter deep hole in Tsarichina was worth the financial cost to the country. In their assessment, the investigators also interviewed the local villagers of the Tsarichina village and its surrounding region, and this led to the uncovering of some very interesting information. During the lifetime of the dig, unusual things were happening in the community. Unexplained phenomena that was witnessed by multiple residents. The results of this new investigation were published in the Sofia Conference paper. It's recorded that there were 26 reports of paranormal and unexplained phenomena from November 1992 to November 1993. These include 21 UFO sightings, 2 poltergeist cases, 1 sighting of a 30-centimeter tall green-blue humanoid, 1 shining silhouette, 1 observation of an intense light beam without a visible source, and 1 observation of a triple sun. And while several cases were highlighted by the conference as noteworthy, one seemed particularly relevant. At the beginning of June 1992, a resident of a neighboring village named Elka Kirova heard her dogs howling outside. She opened her yard door to investigate, and the moment she stepped outside, her eye caught sight of a massive elliptical flaming red object hovering in the sky above. And as she stared at it, it seemed to just float in the air in complete silence for the longest time, until suddenly it flew off in the direction of Tsarichina. The total sighting lasted 5 minutes, but for the following 24 hours, she became completely exhausted and was unable to do anything, as if all the energy had been drained from her body. clearly there are parallels to be made with the warnings given by the Roro of what would happen to a human if exposed to their presence. Perhaps that local was lucky that what she saw was so far off in the distance, and that the price she paid was just 24 hours, as opposed to her life. While the sheer number of UFO sightings and light-related phenomena reported by the locals was acknowledged as strange, the investigation team was less than thrilled after completing their assessment of the project's financials. At 16 million lev and rising, they ultimately concluded that far too much money was being spent on what appeared to be a sci-fi inspired treasure hunt, and that the project must end immediately. Obviously, all those involved with the Tsarichina excavation were devastated. The Bulgarian Ministry of Defense fought passionately to overturn the decision, explaining that the team was so incredibly close to achieving their goal, but their request fell on deaf ears. On November 19, 1992, Operation Sunbeam was shut down. In retrospect, the suddenness of the decision to end the operation is without a doubt suspicious. If they were so close to what they'd been looking for, and with all the money they'd already spent, you'd think a few extra weeks wouldn't make that much of a difference. It's no wonder why most people don't buy the explanation that money was the main motivator in the project's termination. As stated by Loganova, quote, "We were on the verge of a breakthrough when the order came to cease work," end quote. While those involved believe that object number 1 was never excavated from the technicolored chamber, the final events happened so quickly that the possibility does remain that it was taken out by the government before the hole was sealed. Seeing how the project's abrupt termination coincided seemingly days after object number 1's discovery, it's not hard to see a connection. In the end, no one on the original team had the chance to confirm whether or not object number 1 was the first human, the stellar atom, preserved in a dormant state. And whether it was or wasn't, there was no time left to explore the chamber any further, and all opportunity to dig deeper was sealed shut in a literal sense. That November, the hole was filled to the top with concrete, and just as suddenly as they'd first shown up, all former members, vehicles, and equipment left Tsarichina on orders of the Bulgarian government. As for what remains, the answer is not much. Loganova explains in her book, quote, "During the 2 years of the experiment in Tsarichina, we kept all its documentation in good order. A log of the activity was kept. At what time, how many, and exactly which people went down, what was done during the day, etc. Every contact with the Roro was also described in detail. This was repeated every godly day. Each notebook was stapled and taken to the general staff, where it was filed under top secret. Nothing was kept with us. Eventually, it turned out that despite draconian measures to inventory, track, and account for our work, all classified documentation had disappeared. Nothing was left. Neither my diaries, nor my notebooks, nor the recordings with Baba Vanga, nor the film that was shot at the closure of the Tsarichina site." End quote. Today, all that remains of the Tsarichina hole is a small boulder that some anonymous individual placed on top of the concrete, as a reminder of one of the greatest, yet obscure mysteries of Eastern Europe, one that transformed the lives of those who lived through it. And only through their connected memories of these events can we piece together the truth or lore of this inner Earth conspiracy theory. And in terms of what we've investigated on this channel before, I'd say that the Tsarichina hole is worth a second look. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this investigation and haven't seen the last one, you're gonna love Inner Earth Conspiracy Theories number 4, another mind-bending mystery in Eastern Europe. I've also got a playlist with all of my Inner Earth videos linked in the video description, and don't forget to check out Expedition Agartha on Steam and dive into Inner Earth yourself. Finally, I want to give a shout out to my patrons because your support helps me continue doing what I do. I'm Mr. Mythos. Never stop seeking. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.